I think we've been lied to. I do not think the best place to wear a Dexcom G7 is on the back of the arm. Sure, that's what it's FDA approved for, but in my experience, it's actually the worst placement. So let me show you what I think are the 3 best placements for your Dexcom G7, and I'll also include some rather surprising placements that I haven't really been brave enough to try yet. I'm Christelle from Diabetes Strong, and I've been living with type 1 diabetes since 1997. And I've been fortunate enough to have access to the Dexcom G7 since early 2023, meaning I've been wearing it well over a year now. In the beginning, I only wore the Dexcom G7 on the back of my arm. After all, that is the FDA approved placement. So if you're an adult and if you live in the US like I do, that means that if you wear it anywhere else than on the back of your arm, that is considered off-label wear. But that doesn't mean that you can't wear it in other places or that wearing it in another place than the back of the arm won't work better for you. Funny enough, Dexcom G7 is CE marked for wear on both the arm as well as the stomach. Yes, different labels for the same product, but this does seem to indicate that there shouldn't be a problem with wearing the Dexcom G7 on your stomach, just as you could with the Dexcom G6. And the thing is, I absolutely hate wearing my Dexcom G7 on the back of my arm, and I'll tell you why, but first, let me show you my favorite placements. My favorite placement is right here on my upper thigh. I did wear a Dexcom G6 here once in a while, but that sensor was a little bit too bulky for this placement and would sometimes get caught on my pants. But I have no issues with the Dexcom G7 here, since it's so much flatter than the G6. In my experience, when I wear it on my thigh, I have very good accuracy. It's not in the way, I hardly ever have signal losses. And with this placement, I don't think I've had a single compression low. A compression low is not a real low blood sugar. You will get a low alert, but it's only because you're putting pressure on the sensor, for example, when you're sleeping. But when I wear it on my thigh, I don't wear it directly on the side of my thigh, I wear it a little bit to the front. So I end up never putting direct pressure on the sensor. A compression low can be spotted by looking at your CGM graph and not just at the blood sugar reading. Let's say that your blood sugar is bobbing along at 100 and then all of a sudden it's 50, from 100 to 50 in the blink of an eye. And then it might be a compression low. There's only one way to know, and that's by doing a finger stick to check. The only real downside to placing the sensor on the side of your thigh is that if you don't sleep completely still, if you move around a lot, you might rip off your sensor. I did that once. I managed to rip out the sensor directly out of the Dexcom overlay tape, and that hurt. I somehow managed to put pressure on the sensor and sort of twist it out. I have found a solution for that though. I put on a skin grip overlay tape without a cutout, and I haven't had an issue since. And that is my favorite placement. As I mentioned, upper arm is my least favorite placement, so let me tell you why. It's weird, upper arm used to be my favorite placement for Dexcom G6. But when I place my Dexcom G7 on the back of my arm, it seems to be the least accurate readings. I get a lot of compression lows. And then I tend to bump it on things, snacking on things so it gets ripped off. And, I'll hit a door frame, I'll hit the refrigerator door. I know, I'm fairly clumsy. And then there's the skin irritation. Okay, that might not be completely a placement issue, but rather an issue with the Dexcom overlay tape. My body does not like it. As I mentioned, I use a skin grip overlay tape instead. It's been a favorite of mine for years. It's a fabric tape that does not bother my skin. It's easy to apply, it's easy to take off, and it really secures the sensor, keeps it in place. I have a link below this video if you want to check it out, and you can use code DIABETESSTRONG at checkout for 10% off. My second favorite Dexcom G7 placement is on my stomach. So that's not off-label if you're in a country that uses CE mark. For those of you who prefer a discrete placement, this is probably the best one. As with my thigh placement, I have really good accurate readings when I place my Dexcom G7 on my stomach. Since I place it above the belt line, I don't bump it and it doesn't get snagged on belts or pants. It sits so well there that I don't even have to add an overlay tape and it will still last me a full 10 days. I also see very few signal losses when I wear my sensor on my stomach. I think the reason for that is that when I place it on my stomach, it's kind of like in the middle of my body, meaning it's never too far away from my phone where I see my readings. It's not all positives though. For example, if you sleep on your stomach, you might experience more compression lows. Also, if you inject insulin in your stomach, you have to remember that you should never inject insulin within 3 inches of your sensor, so it might be taking up some valuable real estate. Those are my 2 favorite placements and the ones I use the most frequently. But another placement I like as well is on my lower back. I used to place my Dexcom G6 there quite frequently, and what I really like about it is that the sensor is really out of the way. I mean, how often do you bump your lower back on something? I know I'm clumsy, but not that clumsy. Also, I don't inject insulin that often in that area, meaning it's not taking up real estate that I would use for insulin injections. If you're not quite that flexible, you can always use a mirror when inserting it. I like this placement, but there's a reason why I prefer my thigh and my stomach. I rarely drive these days, but when I do, having the sensor on my lower back means that the sensor gets pressed up against the seat, giving me compression lows. I have too much of a sway in my back for it to be an issue when I sleep on my back, but it's something to be mindful of. And finally, applying an overlay tape can be a little tricky unless you're very flexible. And those were my 3 favorite places to wear a Dexcom G7, the thigh, stomach, and lower back. But those are not the only places you can place a Dexcom. I guess technically you can place it anywhere below the neckline. That's not a recommendation, just saying. I've seen some other placements on other people that seem really solid, but to be completely honest, I've been a bit too much of a wuss to try them out. I'll show you 3 that I find fascinating, and if you tried any of them, please leave me a comment down below this video. And the first placement is the front of the arm. I've seen Kylie wear that quite a few times. I've known her for years through the diabetes Instagram community, and you can find her there. Her handle is My Life with Modi. She lives with a type of diabetes called MODY, Modi, Mature Onset Diabetes of the Young. You can go to my website, diabetesstrong.com, if you want to learn more about that. Anyway, I asked her and she told me that for her, Dexcom G7 works just as well at the front of the arm as in other placements. So it might be worth a try. I did wear my Dexcom G6 a few times on the front of my arm, and it was pretty good. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it either. I've done a lot of online searches to see where else are people wearing the Dexcom G7, and surprisingly, I haven't had much luck. It doesn't seem like people are as adventurous where they're wearing the Dexcom G7 as they were with the Dexcom G5 and G6. One of the Dexcom G6 placements that I never built up the nerve to try, but I think could be really solid, is the forearm. My friend Connie would often wear it there. And the last placement that I want to talk about today that I never built up the nerve to try is the calf. And here's Connie again. I just realized that that's a photo of the Dexcom G5, so it's an older one. But she's not the only one who's worn Dexcom on the calf. Here's Tom from Type 1 Talks wearing a Dexcom G6 on his calf. As a side note, if you have a lot of hair on your legs or on your forearms, you might want to shave that before you insert the sensor, just to make sure that the sensor sticks. We don't want it falling off before those 10 days are out. To summarize, I think the 3 best Dexcom G7 placements are the thigh, the stomach, and the lower back. And if I wasn't such a wuss, I would probably also go for the forearm and the calf. The only real reason why I ever wear my Dexcom G7 on the back of my arm is if I really want to show it off. As mentioned up front, if you live in the US, if you're an adult, wearing the Dexcom G7 anywhere else than the back of the arm is considered off-label use. And since it's off-label, I can't guarantee that Dexcom will take responsibility if the sensor falls off or if it malfunctions. However, if you want to wear it somewhere else, just have a discussion with your doctor. They can also recommend alternative replacements and they can prescribe off-label use. It's always recommended to discuss these things with your medical team before making any changes to your diabetes management or your device placement. I've talked a bit about signal loss and some other Dexcom G7 frustrations in this video. If you want to see how I significantly reduce the amount of signal loss that I'm experiencing, I suggest you check out this video. You also saw me referencing my website. If you want to stay in the know, you can sign up for my newsletter here. That was it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.